This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Brace for surging confirmed coronavirus cases. Africa CDC warns as countries ramp up testing. Floods kill more than 260 people as heavy rains pound East Africa. And a Nigerian woman who gave birth to twins at the age of 68 shares her story. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers and I will be with you for the next hour. But joining me for the latest in business news is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Moody's Ratings Agency has revised the outlook on Kenya's sovereign credit rating to negative. And China and the United States pledge to honor their Phase 1 trade agreement. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming away in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thanks, Rama. We'll see you in a bit. For now, let's begin with an update of what's happening in Africa with regard to COVID-19. The continent has recorded over 55,000 cases, with the death toll standing at over 2,000. However, over 19,000 people have recovered. South Africa, which has some of the toughest lockdown measures, continues to record the highest number of cases. Meanwhile, the WHO is warning that up to 190,000 Africans could die of COVID-19 in the first year if control measures fail to work. Meanwhile, the Africa Centers for Diseases Control and Prevention says the continent should brace itself for an increase in the number of COVID-19 cases as more test kits become available and countries identify more cases. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports.
According to a new study by the World Health Organization, up to 44 million people in Africa could get infected in the first year of COVID-19 pandemic if containment measures fail. The Africa CDC says the trend is already worrying.
Looking at the last 1 month or so, every 6 or so days, our numbers have been doubling on the whole continent. And this tells us that there are cases within the communities that are not being picked up fast enough. And if they're not picked up fast enough, it means then they can be able to spread the virus.
Most countries are now reporting cases of people with no history of travel outside the country, meaning community spread is increasing. The African Union and the Africa CDC have a plan to enable countries to test at least 24 million people in the next 24 weeks. Plans are already underway to distribute test kits that have arrived through the Africa CDC. In the meantime, procurement of more test kits is ongoing at the continental level.
The first level is Africa CDC and Africa Union are working with friends and partners to be able to make resources available to purchase the test kits. The second is the countries themselves. They have their own resources. Access to buying test kits is what has been a problem, but right now Africa CDC is coordinating the purchase of test kits for countries using their own money.
Aware of the fact that some citizens are discouraged by the prolonged measures put in place to combat the virus, the Africa CDC warns that the alternative is worse.
We should follow those measures. The alternative is that we'll have a lot of sick people. And when you have a lot of sick people, the health system will be overwhelmed very rapidly. And that way, now those who have COVID will be suffering. Those who have other ailments will also be suffering because the health system will not be able to accommodate the large numbers.
Lesotho is the only country that has not reported cases. The Africa CDC says it could be a matter of time before it does. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Meanwhile, South Sudan's government has eased restrictions put in place to contain the spread of COVID-19. The country has reported 74 cases but 0 deaths. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
South Sudan's government says the nationwide curfew will now begin 3 hours later from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. instead of from 7 p.m. to 6 a.m. The order comes into effect on Friday. Sport and social gatherings are, however, still suspended. The government says it will concentrate its effort in educating the population on the preventive measures to contain the spread of COVID-19. The health ministry says wearing masks is mandatory for all, but some restrictions are now lifted.
1. Reopening internal travel by air, land, and river. 2. Allow regional flights back to South Sudan. 3. Internal measures, reopening markets, shops, bars, tea places, and restaurants. However, B. Schools, churches, mosques, nightclubs will remain closed.
All travelers must have a certificate from the government laboratory indicating that they are not infected by the coronavirus. Those coming into South Sudan from other countries will still have to be quarantined for 14 days, and businesses are required to enforce hand-washing rules for customers. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Volkswagen South Africa has made a section of its Port Elizabeth plant available for use as a temporary medical facility. Once fully operational, the facility will be able to accommodate up to 4,000 beds for COVID-19 patients. Angela Coppola has more.
The planned conversion will take a 66,000-metre square building that was used to house the VW components factory to provide a field hospital.
When the medical team lay out the prognosis and what they thought is going to happen in Port Elizabeth and surrounding, I almost needed oxygen because the magnitude of the problem, I wasn't quite aware of it.
The conversion was conceived and designed with a hospital architect and the engineers at VW, but it came with a hefty price tag of some $6.6 million. The German government came to the rescue.
They have a program to help in Africa, and in the discussion it became apparent that they were actually willing to help us here. And so funding was secured through the German government. They agreed to help us to set up the facility if we come on board as a company as well.
The company has invested $1.5 million in the field hospital. The facility will be available for the local health authorities until March 2021.
The needs that the South African Department of Health has indicated is longer than the next couple of weeks. So we need about 6 to 7 weeks to get the facility up and running. We then have been told that South Africa anticipates the peak of the pandemic at about September this year.
The automaker has also been designing and developing reusable silicone masks and low-cost ventilators that are going to help the hospitals and the frontline workers in their fight against COVID-19. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The Democratic Republic of Congo has received a donation of the herbal remedy touted by Madagascar's President Andry Rajoelina. According to Rajoelina, the remedy cures COVID-19 within 10 days. The COVID organics infusion is derived from Artemisia, a plant with proven anti-malarial properties, along with other indigenous herbs. Madagascar's president hopes to distribute the infusion across West Africa and beyond. Equatorial Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, and Niger have also received consignments of COVID-19. Meanwhile, the WHO has warned that there are no published scientific studies of the herbal mixture and says that the effects have not yet been tested. Medics in DR Congo, however, are hopeful that Madagascar's remedy could put an end to COVID-19 in their country. Health authorities in Somalia have expressed concern after a person tested positive for COVID-19 in a camp for the internally displaced. Somalia has close to 900 confirmed novel coronavirus cases. In a bid to help curb an outbreak, university students have begun distributing locally made hand sanitizers to help contain rising infections in IDP camps. Reporting from Mogadishu, here's CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilal.
These university students are visiting displacement camps on the outskirts of Beledweyne in central Somalia. Their mission, sensitizing vulnerable communities on the importance of basic hygiene in preventing COVID-19.
We have modified the normal hand sanitizer with readily available chemicals. The end product is a powerful hand sanitizer that can kill viruses and bacteria. We initiated this project as university students, and we hope to increase our output and assist our people.
In Beledweyne, thousands fleeing conflict, drought and floods have pitched camp here as they wait for help from regional authorities and international aid organizations.
We will use it to kill germs and bacteria by applying it on our children and all our family members. Prevention is better than cure, and we remain grateful for the assistance.
More than 1 million people live in camps for the displaced, according to data from the United Nations, with at least one person testing positive for the virus. Aid agencies warn that COVID-19 is a ticking time bomb in the Horn of Africa nation that's dealing with many challenges worsened by a weak health system.
We are concerned about the increased number of cases, and unfortunately we consider that we haven't seen the peak and that we will still see a large number of cases being confirmed. In case we continue to see this surge of cases, we are in a position to support the local authorities by creating these isolation areas for moderate to severe cases, not the 5% that will need ventilators. And we have a bed capacity in Kismayo Hospital of 13 beds, in Baidea of 8 beds, in Kesani of 15 beds, and Medina Hospital of 25 beds.
Somalia has the highest number of deaths in the region with close to 40 confirmed fatalities. The infection rate is also the second highest in the Horn of Africa after Djibouti, that has more than 1,000 cases of coronavirus. More than 80 people have recovered from the disease in the country, with medical workers the majority of new infections. And with only one treatment unit for the virus, health experts warn that the Somali government is not prepared to handle a major outbreak of the coronavirus. Abdulaziz Bilon, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
French scientists say they may have identified a possible case of the new coronavirus dating back to November. This would be 2 months before the first cases were officially confirmed in Europe. Ross Cullen reports from Paris.
Amiouche Amar is a fishmonger, originally from Algeria. He lives in the suburbs of Paris, he's married with children, and there's also now the possibility that he's one of the first people in Europe to have contracted COVID-19.
It shocked my wife, and then we saw the epidemic, the deadly tidal wave everywhere around the world. I'm blessed, honestly. The illness wasn't known back then. That's the worst thing. It wasn't known at the time. The doctors didn't know what to do. For them, it was a very severe infection. That's what was explained to me, but they weren't able to detect it.
But he may not be the only one to have caught the virus early, or even the first. A hospital in eastern France, using different tests, now says it's found a case of a man with the coronavirus from mid-November. The team of doctors which uncovered Amar's illness late last year says other hospitals have even better testing equipment that could result in more old samples coming back positive. Here is French doctor Yves Cohen.
Radio scanning is a very sensitive exam to detect COVID-19. It's better than our tests as their sensitivity is 98%, while ours is only around 70 to 75%. So it's good it's so sensitive, and if cases were really around in mid-November, it's extremely interesting and means the virus was spreading sooner than we thought.
This raises questions about the origins of the coronavirus. Dr. Cohen says his study tells us more about the spread.
We know it didn't start in early January, but earlier. What we can say is that the pandemic wave is slower than expected. The virus spreads slower. We know that we have almost 30,000 deaths in France and 1% of mortality rate for the virus. That means 3 to 4.5 million French people have been in contact with the virus.
French doctors suggest China, the US and other European nations retest old samples that could establish coronavirus cases existed across the world before the pandemic was officially recognised. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
German news outlet Der Spiegel says an intelligence report casts doubt over U.S. allegations that COVID-19 originated in a Chinese lab. The report, prepared for the German defense minister, says the accusations are an attempt to divert attention from the U.S. government's shortcomings in dealing with the pandemic. Top U.S. officials, including President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, claim there is evidence to back the lab origin theory, but without further elaboration, U.S. intelligence agencies have, however, said that the virus was not man-made. Let's now take a short break. When we return, more news making headlines, including floods kill more than 260 people as heavy rains pound East Africa. And Nigeria's military says it has killed nearly 500 terrorists and bandits in the past 2 months.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt,
along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Let's now turn our focus to our continuing series on the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on Africa. Our CGTN correspondents have been working hard to give us the latest updates from across the continent, but reporting on COVID-19 comes with its own unique set of challenges. Our reporters shared with us how their journey has been so far. Well, CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy is one of our correspondents who's been working hard to provide updates. He has been locked out of his home country, Uganda. He narrates his ordeal away from home.
Far off in a foreign land with normalcy disrupted, I closely monitor reports coming out of my motherland, Uganda, where authorities declared a total lockdown over a month ago.
When it comes to health, it is better to be a coward and be on the side of caution.
This being a new virus, there is no immunity in the population, so the majority of the population are vulnerable.
My family is back in Kampala. With COVID-19 invading our space, I've had to make adjustments. The uncertain situation demands that I have to chat with my family more frequently. It's never long enough.
Dylan was unwell last night, and I had to rush him to hospital in the middle of the night, despite the presidential directive on curfew.
Some of those low moments in life, I guess, when I cannot be there to offer a hand. Being unable to visit, converse with, hug, or spend time with family seems all because of the COVID-19 pandemic leaves me with that empty feeling. Friends back home inquire about the status of the virus from me daily, hoping that I have some inside scoop on the latest from the front lines as a journalist.
Do you think the vaccine is actually coming? Do you think it's something that we should say, okay, we should all look out for? Do you think those efforts are being done?
How I wish I had the answers on my fingertips, but I don't. With my family and friends looking up to me to provide some measure of reassurance, honesty seems to provide the best comfort. I tell my family and friends not to panic, and that the best thing to do is to stay home, avoid high-risk family members and friends, and to call the authorities in case of severe symptoms. COVID-19 has taken us to some uncharted territory where distance is the norm. Life seems more like survival than living. Will humanity ever return to normalcy? Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, here now is another update from CGTN's Robert Nagila.
COVID-19 has had a huge impact in how we as journalists approach our work. There are now technical and technological aspects to it. With physical and movement restrictions across much of the continent, government and private sector offices are all shut, so you've got a lot more people working from home. So first, accessing subjects is a challenge, and when you do access them, there's certain things to consider. Number one, what format is that interview going to be carried out? Is it going to be via apps like Skype? And if you do have to physically go there, then there are safety issues that need to be addressed, because you need to protect not just yourself, but your crew and your subject as well. That's very, very important. When you go out to the field, safety is paramount. Do you have the correct safety gear? Is your equipment well protected, sanitized? Does your subject have a mask on? How do you interview your subject? You're probably going to use a microphone with a stick, for example. And when you're shooting out in the field, certain safety protocols have to come into play, because at times you're also shooting under some very difficult circumstances. For example, here in Kenya, we have a curfew, but you need to have your credentials to show security officials just in case they approach you. You're constantly trying to work within a balance, risk versus reward. Normally at this particular time, there would be dozens of stories that we would be following out there. The AU summit is there. Several countries were due to hold their elections as well. So this is a really busy period for us as media. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, all that's been cancelled, and the global focus now is on the pandemic itself. It's clear that for much of the year, and probably well into next year, the pandemic is going to dominate the news cycles, and we will be on this bit for quite some time.
Well, CGTN's business correspondent Sumitra Naidu in South Africa walked us through her daily juggle while working during this COVID-19 pandemic. Let's take a look.
Okay, name 3 countries on the map that have a border with the ocean.
A mother helping her son with his schoolwork. A normal household scene. Except these are anything but typical times. My 10-year-old son, Joshua, hasn't seen a classroom for more than 3 weeks. And every time I leave the house to tell the stories of a nation under lockdown, I'm placing my life and his at risk.
It's difficult, eh?
I've had to think long and hard about how to work safely. I could contract the virus from my movements, my interactions with people at any time. But it is important to me to continue my work.
Government has heard the pleas of the tobacco industry, but still believes that it's more important.
As a journalist, I have a responsibility to inform the public, tell stories and raise awareness.
I think there was 13.
It is tough, though, hearing the struggles of people, many that have lost their only income.
What are you doing now that you're unable to work?
Others that are going hungry, and hearing of those that have died. I doubt life will ever be the same. I am grateful that I am still able to work, do what I love, and contribute to society. Sumitra Naidu reporting for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Our Egypt correspondent Adel Al-Marouchi has narrated his experiences while covering stories on COVID-19. Even as he did this, he remained confident he was safe from the virus until one situation reminded him of his vulnerability.
When Egypt began to report COVID-19 cases and impose the night curfew, our work changed completely. Many guests would refuse to grant us interviews, and we too were worried to go to them. At first I thought that doing an interview in an open area would grant me some safety and reduce chances of infection. But as one interviewee spoke to me, droplets of saliva reached my face. I then realized that I needed to take much more measures to protect myself. Later on, when cases were reported at the National Cancer Institute in Cairo, we had to go inside to request for interviews with officials. Remember that many staff at that institute had tested positive for coronavirus. Covering the pandemic is not easy. It's sometimes risky. It's mostly about heartbreaking stories, but there was the bright side. Stories about how the youth would volunteer to spread awareness and distribute face masks and disinfectants for free were heartwarming. Then there was the story of how inventors were inspired to create disinfectant gates to increase public safety. And how a nation like Egypt, despite its budget deficits and struggling economy under the pandemic, would, regardless to that cost, send medical supplies to its friend states in different corners of the world. The deadly virus is putting an immense pressure on the world, but it has also shown the best in people and in nations. And no matter how hard the measures taken to curb the spread of the disease are, people always find a way to march on. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Here is C.S. Duplessis' perspective on covering COVID-19 as a sports reporter for CGTN.
It's changed considerably. The only reason I'm standing here in this park is because I'm an essential service, and in South Africa, journalists are deemed an essential service. So from that point of view, we have the freedom of movement. And this lockdown has prevented us from using that freedom of movement where normally we're used to going to athletes or training sessions, where content has been on our doorsteps. Now we have to be inventive, we have to source the content, and we have to rely heavily on technology to get the stories out. I think one thing's for sure is a lot of people will realize how fortunate they are to be in a position to be able to tell stories and bring news to people. And I'm particularly fortunate to be in that position, and something I've realized that I can't take for granted, because the COVID-19 pandemic has changed how the world interacts, how the world engages with other people. And I think this has taught me that you should never take for granted what you have, and that you should appreciate every single moment, because we tend to take sporting experiences in our stride without thinking what they actually mean to everyday people. And know that now that there's no live sport, we realize that it's such a huge part of society, and being able to tell the sport stories and bring those stories to people is such an important part of people's daily lives. So it's taken this pandemic for me to realize how fortunate I am to be a part of the team at CGTN and being able to tell stories to the public. I think what I'm excited about is when the lockdown is eventually over and when we overcome this pandemic that's gripped the sports world. I think sport will be celebrated for what it's worth. I think a lot of people just they know sport is there, so their weekly, their football matches or their rugby games or their tournaments that they participate in and watch, people take that for granted to a certain extent. So now when we overcome this tragedy, this pandemic that has claimed so many lives, I think people are going to be aware that they're fortunate to have sport, to have the best athletes once again plying their trade. So from the ashes, if you can put it that way, there will be a huge celebration in sport, a huge uptake in the keenness and interest in sport once again. And an event like the Olympics in 2021 is just going to be absolutely incredible once we overcome this terrible time in the world. The most challenging aspect to doing your job in this current time is that the athletes are locked down, the administrators are locked down. A lot of the sports stories are coming via technology. So for a journalist in this environment, it's not just a case of going to a training session or a press conference where athletes and coaches are speaking. You have to interact with them. So the challenge has been to rely on your network, to rely on your contacts, and rely on your relationships to bring the stories. So it has changed the way we go about putting out the stories, getting that content, but at the same time it's taught us to appreciate what we do even more.
In other news, the United Nations has raised concern over the surging violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The UN says the conflict in the country's Ituri region has displaced more than 200,000 people since March, mostly women and children. Tensions have been high in the northern state since the government launched a military operation against armed groups in December. The UN has called for an all-out parties to respect civilian lives and humanitarian work. More than 260 people have been killed in the ongoing floods across East Africa. Kenya is the worst hit with over 194 people killed. Weather experts are warning of more rains. CGTN's Nick Mudimba reports.
As the East Africa continues grappling with floods, meteorologists are warning of more rains, which could last until the end of May. Regionally, Kenya has lost the highest number of people, with 194 out of the 260 deaths being reported there.
The water levels have risen so much. We are now pushed out of the lake. We thank God we haven't lost any fish.
There is trouble. Water has spread all over. Many people have been displaced, houses destroyed. It's been a month now, and I've never witnessed such a phenomenon. Businesses are affected. Things have been worsened by coronavirus. No one's traveling from other parts of the country to buy from us.
Authorities says forceful relocation in the affected parts could be employed if locals fail to move to safer areas. Uganda follows with 65 deaths. Thousands are also displaced, mostly in western regions. Kasese town and Buhunga village are facing worsening situations. The overflowing of Lake Victoria has also seen many parts of Uganda suffer electricity blackouts. This follows the clogging of turbines by floating vegetation in one of the hydroelectric power plants situated along River Nile. In Rwanda, over 11,000 locals have been displaced. An unknown number of people have also been killed in landslides in the mountainous northwestern region. Somalia also continues facing deadly flash floods, which have displaced over 20,000 households. Roads, homes and other installations have also been washed away as water levels in the Shebele River rise to unprecedented levels. For the Horn of Africa nation, the situation started late last year, forcing the United Nations to issue a warning. Aid agencies are also warning of a food crisis should the torrential rains persist. Nick Mudimba, CGTN.
The Nigerian military says it has killed nearly 500 terrorists and bandits across the northern region of the country in the past 2 months. The West African nation has been battling to end a decade-long insurgency while tackling bandit attacks and kidnappings in other parts of the north. CGTN's Philly Haza reports from Abuja, the nation's capital.
At least 343 insurgents have been killed by the military in counterinsurgency operations across the northeast between March and May this year. The coordinator of Defense Media Operations, Major General John Enenche, says 153 armed bandits were also neutralized and several hostages freed in the northern region, where reports of banditry have surged in recent years. According to Enenche, troops have destroyed several logistics installations and networks belonging to the terrorists, as well as arrested 16 high-profile informants of the sect operating in the northeast. Nigeria has been faced with several insecurity challenges, including insurgency, kidnap and banditry that has claimed the lives of over 30,000 people and displaced 2 million more. However, the army has stepped up attacks against the terrorist groups, and the country's president, Buhari, maintains that the insurgents have been decimated and have lost much of the territories they previously occupied in the region. Buhari has promised an end to insurgency in the country, with a clean-up operation Lafia Dole being carried out by the military in the northeast. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Well, those are the stories making headlines across the continent. For now, let's take a look at what's happening in the world of business with Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business. The Moody's ratings agency has revised Kenya's credit rating outlook to negative. And China and the United States are pledging to honor Phase 1 trade agreements. We'll have the details when we come back.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start in East Africa. Kenya's enormous borrowing requirements have pushed the country's rating outlook to be changed to negative from stable. Now, that essentially applies on the same rating, B2, from Moody's ratings agency. But it does reflect the rising financial risks posed by Kenya's enormous debt binge, which includes amortization of external bilateral debt and the need to refinance a huge stock of short-term domestic debt as well. Already, Kenya's fiscal health is fast deteriorating as the closure of businesses and loss of jobs in key sectors is eroding the country's tax revenue base. The ratings agency also notes that this debt structure exposes Kenya's fiscal metrics to exchange rate and interest pricing shocks too. Moody's reckons that while Kenya doesn't face acute financial pressures right now, the severe tightening of financial conditions will certainly challenge the government's ability to meet much larger financial needs without an increase, a drastic one, in the cost of debt. Further afield, China and the United States say they will honour their Phase 1 trade agreement and will push to establish a positive environment for further cooperation. The comments are made during a phone call between China's Vice Premier and top trade negotiator, Liu He, and the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, and the Treasury Secretary as well, Steve Mnuchin. Now, the Phase 1 deal was signed in January, covering issues including international property rights and tech transfer, and China's purchasing of U.S. goods. It was the first major breakthrough in a two-year-long trade conflict. Over the next 48 hours, South Africa's Public Enterprises Minister, Pravin Gordhan, is set to meet the South African Airways Business Rescue Team in an effort to iron out tensions between the group and the South African government. Now, the state is at loggerheads with the airline, which wants all flights, including those designed to repatriate stranded South Africans, stopped by Friday. SAA, as you might recall, was put into business rescue as a form of local bankruptcy protection at the end of 2019. The business rescue practitioners have recommended that the company either be liquidated or wound down, with all staff retrenched. But the government is intent on seeing a new airline, a smaller one at that, rising from the ashes. On to Zimbabwe now. Its 2020 tobacco selling season has gotten off to a rather slow start as both farmers and merchants adapt to new protocols which aim to contain COVID-19. Tobacco is the second largest source of foreign currency earnings after gold in Zimbabwe. Just last year, it generated nearly $750 million in export revenue. Most of that was from buyers in China and Europe. From Harare, here's CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya.
Deliveries in the first week of sales are lower than the same period last year, a reflection of the reduction in the number of growers and hectarage put under the crop last year, but also a result of logistical challenges presented by the coronavirus, which has disrupted transportation and seen sales being conducted under unfamiliar, strict controls.
Normally, farmers want to be here in person so they can see for themselves just how much their crop fetches. But because of a need to decongest the sales floor, only farmers with 100 bales or more are allowed to witness the auction. It's left some small-scale growers in the dark.
It's been 3 days since we got here, and we have no idea if our tobacco has been bought or not and for how much. All we have been told is that the payment vouchers are still being processed.
When they do get paid, half of their proceeds will be in US dollars and the balance in local currency.
It's the first time in several years that we'll get half of our money in US dollars. A promise we hope will materialize because it means that we can preserve the value of our money, sustain our families and restock inputs so that we can go back to the field next season.
Tobacco production is projected around 213 million kilograms, which will generate hundreds of millions of US dollars, a crucial injection of liquidity in the wake of a COVID-19-induced economic slowdown. The effects of the pandemic could spill over to the next season.
We are recommending farmers to get prepared for any event, which entails farmers have to have the appropriate protective equipment at the farms. They have to have the sanitizers, they have to have the thermometers, they have to have the mask for their workforce, which is really an additional cost to a already strained farmer, thereby threatening the viability of the farmer.
The extra burden could weigh some of them down, leading to another drop in production and revenue in 2021. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
On to North America now, where masks are increasingly becoming quite the sales booster, especially for online retailers amidst this pandemic. CGTN's Karina Huber finds out more from a swimwear designer who recently shifted to making masks.
Denitsa Salaiko usually spends her days making and selling bathing suits. But in the age of COVID-19, her sewing machine is furiously churning out only one thing: masks.
My website went crazy for the masks. Like, I put them up and I was like, what's going on? Like, it just went insane.
She says it's been hard to keep up with demand. Masks are a completely new business for the swimwear designer who opened her first brick-and-mortar store in Toronto 2 years ago.
When I found out like the stores all had to close, I thought, okay, what am I going to do? So that's why I decided to start making the masks. I got these fun prints, and I think that they'll make people smile and make you feel safe when you're walking around in public.
The masks are made of repurposed bathing suit material. She sells them mainly through Shopify, a Canadian e-commerce platform. Amid the outbreak, business has been booming for Shopify. The company's chief technology officer tweeted, "Our platform is now handling Black Friday level traffic every day." Rival Etsy has also seen traffic surge.
Etsy and Shopify are both traded here in the U.S. on the NASDAQ. Initially, their shares fell when the coronavirus outbreak hit the U.S., but now their stocks are both popping, making them one of the hottest stocks to own right now.
Wedding and jewelry revenue have dropped for Etsy, but games and puzzles have done well. This as more people than ever are sheltering in. Equity analyst Tom Forte says Etsy is also benefiting from record unemployment.
So when you think of 30 million job loss in 6 weeks, and you think of kind of the Great Recession, well, they talk about the side hustle. So for Etsy, they're clearly going to have more sellers looking to either supplement their income or have income.
Many Etsy sellers are focused on making masks, an entirely new category for the e-commerce giant. Forte says the boost from that could last a while.
This extended period of time without a vaccine, those masks are going to be a requirement. So I think that the next 2-year period is setting up very well for both Etsy and for Shopify.
Karina Huber, CGTN, New York.
And finally, the United Kingdom's lockdown is still on, but limited easing may start from the 11th of May. That's next week, Monday. Now, what measures will be taken in order to avoid a second wave of infections will be announced on Sunday. Today, however, was also the 75th anniversary of VE Day, essentially Victory in Europe Day, the day the Second World War ended in Europe with the surrender of Nazi Germany. Many businesses could have cashed in on the influx of local and foreign tourists, but the day was pretty subdued, as Asta Tal now reports.
Streets in London remain eerily empty as businesses remain shut. The lobby at the London Bridge Hotel is no different. Given that it's Victory Day in Europe, or V-Day, this place would be abuzz with activities as guests from far and wide came to celebrate the day when Europe declared victory in the Second World War. But the coronavirus pandemic has halted this and many other activities. However, when the lockdown is lifted, all guests arriving in here should expect a new order.
We have a policy, obviously, that people, as soon as they walk through the doors, they will have an hygienic mat, a disinfectant mat where they're going to step into, where they're going to sort of cross over with their suitcases as well. They're going to have our staff handing over masks if they don't have one. Handing over some disinfectant for their hands, and also we will be disinfecting every single piece of suitcase that comes through the doors.
The hotel is currently hosting hospital staff, and still caution dictates its mode of operation, and it is not easy.
I think it's the biggest task of all, to be honest with you, because understandably a bedroom like our own homes, it's one of those areas where the points of contacts are multiple. So what we tried to do initially was we tried to decrease the amount of points of contact that will allow for sort of transmission, and that is by decluttering the room as much as possible. That is the first step, even before the guest walks into the room.
There is hope that the restrictions will be lifted soon. But for businesses like London Bridge Hotel, the current lockdown is taking its toll.
So it is becoming critical. They are running out of cash. We are talking about weeks, not months, that they've got left to survive before we need to have an injection of further support from the government.
Many might be forced to scale down on their workforce.
Well, I think without that support package from the government for the remainder of this year to some extent, you will see 30 to 50,000 premises at risk of closure and up to 2 million jobs in hospitality and the wider supply chain at risk.
Things are expected to get back to normal across the world after the COVID-19 pandemic is over, including here in London. But it's still not yet known when that will be, and the economic effects might linger on for a much longer time. Astatal, CGTN.
And I'll leave you there for the time being. Here's what's coming up at the top of the hour, though. We'll be in Egypt. The cabinet over there has essentially considered a total opening of businesses despite the pandemic still raging across the country. Their argument? We'll have to learn how to live with this particular pathogen. We'll explore why at the top of the hour. See you at 1800 GMT. For now, back to Hannah.
We're looking forward to that, Rama. Thank you so much. We're going to take a short break now. When we return, more news making headlines, including a Nigerian woman who gave birth to twins at the age of 68 shares her story.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
A 68-year-old Nigerian woman has set what is considered a medical record in Africa when she gave birth to twins. Margaret Adenunga delivered the babies through a cesarean section operation at the Lagos State University Teaching Hospital. She and her 77-year-old husband have been married for 46 years but had no child until now. CGTN's Deji Badmouth has been there to see the new parents and now reports.
Unless you've heard their story, you'd probably mistake the babies for their grandchildren. But the twins are actually the children of Margaret and Noah Adenuga. And yes, 68-year-old Margaret gave birth to them. The couple had been married since 1974 and had been trying for a child without success until now.
What can I say? When he finally came, we are happy. I was overwhelmed, but we thank God. We give glory to God.
Carrying your own baby now, how does it feel? What's the experience like?
I'm very happy to see them. So I'm happy. I'm happy, always happy when I see them.
Their story is that of human perseverance in the face of a seemingly impossible situation. After 3 failed IVF attempts, the couple did not give up. The 4th attempt eventually led to the birth of the twins.
When we started, I keep assuring my wife that you have it, it will happen. It's going to cost money. I only ask my wife, because of her age, do you think you can still carry pregnancy at your age? Say, why not? Say, why not? If you are there, relax. It's not over until it is over.
I never lose hope any day. Anyway, I used to tell him that where we are living, I said before we leave that place, we are going to carry our baby. If our baby are going with us, it's not only one. They are going to be 2. I'm a church goer. So in the church, I used to see many testimonies that there's nothing God cannot do. So yes, I have faith on that. I stand on my faith that God will do it.
Apart from their own self-imposed pressure, the couple say they faced enormous pressure from their family and friends as well.
My mother, before she died, we were at loggerhead because she wanted me to marry another woman. I told her, you are not to tell me who to marry. Even my sister, they are telling me one day, there was a day I'm free with them because occasionally I'm free with them. I told them, but I say, please, auntie is old. I say, yes. Go and look for a younger person.
How were you able to deal with the pressure coming from his family?
He was the one giving me confidence that I shouldn't, when something happened like that and the one you are, that your husband did not take their side, you'll have confidence on yourself.
Margaret almost lost the pregnancy. Doctors had to keep her in the hospital and monitor her in the last 3 months before she delivered the twins.
When you were told you were going to have a CS, were you scared?
I was not. Even they asked me to sign. I signed for it. So I was good. I know that nothing will happen.
What's your wish going forward for these children?
Sorry?
What's your wish and what's your dream for them?
I wish God will do whatever I wanted. I can do. God will provide. Whatever they want, God will provide.
The Almighty God that gave me these twins will provide enough for me to take care of them. And it will give me good health, long life, so that I can take care of them. I believe by the time I'm say 80-something, they will have grown up to see me, to know what I have for them. And by the power of Almighty God, they will never regret coming to me. So they know.
They went through a lot to realize their dream, and now they are living it. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, your sport news is coming up after the break. Here's a highlight. Online cricket courses conducted in South Africa amid the lockdown.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment